So on university campuses today, we're seeing record rates of distress in the student population. And Canadian students report the top 4 factors affecting academic performance: stress, anxiety, sleep difficulties, and depression. And we're seeing these struggles reflected in dramatically increasing rates of need for mental health support on campuses. And this is not just in Canada, it's worldwide. Many are calling it a student mental health crisis. Today we're here to address 2 key questions. How did this happen, and what can we do about it?
So I grew up in rural Saskatchewan, and I actually did my undergraduate degree here at this institution nearly 30 years ago. My experience in school was, of course, very different, in small town Saskatchewan than it was when I came to university. But the way I was taught, as well as what I learned, really bridged nicely into my university courses. It was, I'd say, a natural continuation of the path that I was already on. I also had the great advantage of having parents, and actually even grandparents, who had studied at this place before me. So from hearing about their experiences to having opportunities to actually visit this campus as a child, I had a really good idea of what this place was about. I guess you could say that these experiences actually provided me with a map that I could actually carry with me. So stepping onto campus at 17, I connected with people who looked and thought like me, professors who I could relate to. I always knew that if I worked hard, the path that I was on would lead me to opportunities and the chance to make a difference. Even when I struggled, I had that map. I knew people like me who had made it to the destination. I had a community of support. Looking back now, I realize how absolutely privileged I was in so many ways. I was on a journey that had been designed with people like me in mind.
My experience was similar, and I actually even had the privilege in the UK of not actually paying tuition fees, if you can imagine that. And this definitely lowered the stakes for me and actually reduced my levels of stress. But despite this, I still struggled at times.
So what do you think are some of the key factors affecting student mental health today?
Well, let's start by dispelling a widely held belief. Research doesn't suggest that students today are more psychologically fragile than their predecessors. It's actually often the opposite. But what is acknowledged is that students are living in a much more uncertain, complex, and competitive world. And this actually has a huge influence on their mental health.
Yeah. I mean, another big factor, of course, is that we're much better at diagnosis and tracking mental health concerns. And this has got to contribute something to the increase as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And a high number of students actually accessing services actually reflects a positive societal shift in attitudes towards mental health. So overall, we've actually started to do a much better job at reducing stigma around mental health issues, which removes barriers for people to actually get the help that they need.
So more people access the services.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually nowadays, 75% of mental illnesses or disorders are actually diagnosed before the age of 24. And many of these young people were not accessing, let alone succeeding in higher education a generation ago. And that's changing now. Higher education has become more supportive and more accessible. And universities are generally doing a better job at shaping strategies and allocating funding for health and well-being initiatives to actually support this particularly vulnerable 18 to 25-year-old age group.
Right. So some of the increases that we're seeing in access to mental health services are actually a sign of progress.
That's right. So what else do you think has actually changed since we were undergraduates?
Well, how about the obvious social media?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it plays a big role in creating that uncertain and competitive world, or that complex world that I was just talking about. But I'm not actually convinced that social media is the cause of mental health issues. Instead, what I think it is a huge lens that actually magnifies all the problems and positives that were always there.
But maybe not as visible.
Right, exactly. So what else?
Well, The diversity of our campus populations, including neurodiversity, has increased significantly. In the last decade, you can see that student populations are far more diverse than they used to be. I mean, back in our time, a majority of graduates and students were local, privileged, young, able-bodied people.
And now there's actually groups of students in the Canadian environment who actually weren't represented until fairly recently. Their pathways onto campus are far more diverse, their educational experiences, skills, even their cultures are much more varied, which actually brings a richness that actually wasn't there before. But actually this richness is really only of value if those students feel supported, actually included enough to actually stay in this environment.
Right. So, I mean, those people who are joining our learning journey from different pathways, they don't come with that map the way that I did. I mean, I had the counsel of family who had made this particular journey before, and I mean, many of them just don't.
But it sounds like you felt you really belonged here. I mean, you came back.
I did. I mean, as an undergraduate, I could spend quite a bit of time on campus, building friendships and making connections. I mean, I didn't have that many competing priorities. I also didn't have to work really long hours to get by financially, and nor did many of my peers.
No, same here. And actually, my program was pretty small, which meant that it felt quite easy to feel like I belonged and that people actually cared about me. The huge numbers of students on campuses nowadays actually means that universities become actually quite impersonal environments, and the large number of people doesn't actually create more opportunity to make meaningful connections. Often the opposite. And actually in a survey from 2019, nearly 70% of the Canadian students who responded actually reported feeling very lonely at a certain point in the year. So 70%.
Wow, yeah, I mean, it takes real planning and effort to make connections amongst a large and more diverse group.
Yeah.
I mean, we obviously need to work hard to make more opportunities for students to do so. So what else?
Well, research is also telling us that actually students of today are far more focused on extrinsic goals and motivators, which is to say their parents' expectations, getting top marks, scoring the perfect job, and actually much less on intrinsic things like curiosity, the desire to learn, personal growth.
Right. I mean, I know I approached a course very differently if I was focused on a subject that was, relevant and interesting to me, rather than just thinking about my mark.
But it does seem to all be about the grades these days, all the time, which actually has the potential to have a seriously undermining effect on positive mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't thinking about how one mark was going to destroy my entire life plan.
But it does make sense, though, doesn't it, given the uncertainty of the world and their future. But also, actually more graduates nowadays means there's going to be more competition in the job market. It's understandable why students feel they have to be laser focused on top grades at the expense of everything else, including sometimes their health.
Yeah.
And actually, given the competitive nature of universities, which is not really going to change, actually, students often don't ask for the help that they need for fear of being seen as weak or incapable. And there's definitely power dynamics on campus or cultural dimensions that are at play with this.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember the last time that you asked a professor a question in front of 300 other students?
Exactly. But that does mean that students suffer in silence, doing their best to stay on course on a journey that actually they know wasn't really designed with them in mind.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I can see how, if you don't connect or see relevance in what you're learning, you don't feel a sense of belonging in the place that you're learning, you aren't sure about where you're going or how you're going to get there. I mean, university has the potential to be a very unhappy place.
Yeah, it really does.
A student might even end up feeling like there's just no way to succeed.
Or they push themselves beyond their limits to succeed, which can result in mental illness and, in rare cases, death by suicide.
It's really hard not to feel overwhelmed and really powerless in the face of those tragedies.
It really is, yeah.
I don't get the sense, though, that you think the answer is hiring more and more mental health practitioners.
No, I don't. I mean, mental health practitioners are a key piece of the puzzle nowadays, and students need them more than ever. But their work typically deals with symptoms rather than causes. In reality, they don't really influence what actually happens in the classroom.
Right. Okay. So no one issue has gotten us to where we are, and no one solution is going to solve it.
That's right.
I do know, however, that we've learned an awful lot about teaching and learning in higher education in the last 30 years. And we know a lot about how we can create learning journeys that are conducive to positive mental health. And if we know better...
We need to do better.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think we could actually do to get upstream from these issues so that perhaps fewer students get lost in the first place?
Well, research suggests that there are 4 key things, amongst others, but 4 key things that we're going to highlight today. In our learning journeys, that map that I had, that's the design of our curriculum. It's the plan that we have for students during their studies with us. If our plan sees each stage of the journey connect to and build on the previous one, then navigation just becomes way more straightforward. We also likely don't want students to be climbing a mountain on day number 2. So we plan for the terrain to slowly get more challenging as the journey goes on.
And actually only climb the mountain if it's essential for their journey, not just because our generation had to.
We need to know better and therefore do better. To achieve these things with our design and design of our curriculum, we need institutions to provide support and invest in making this happen. We need curriculum teams to actually work collaboratively. And we need curriculum support specialists to provide that support.
Okay, so that's number 1. Mm-hmm. What else?
Well, we need to provide thoughtful instruction to our students through their journey. If our instruction allows students ample time to be actually actively engaged in the classroom, so that could be through discussion, through problem solving, through thinking, we're far more likely to be supporting them in their learning. So for example, faculty here in the College of Engineering have got first-year students actually engaging and undertaking design projects rather than just hearing about the principles of design.
So I hear and I forget, I do and I understand.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
To achieve this, we need classrooms and we need tools that are designed for this type of learning. Mm-hmm. We also need time for, but also investment by instructors to plan their teaching and to learn from others who are doing this already.
Okay. What about number 3?
Well, we also need to think about how students connect to their journey. So how does their past experience, for example, make sense in terms of what's going on in the curriculum? Those paths that they've been on before.
So we would take examples from their lives. They are adult learners after all. Mm-hmm. And so we would try and focus on things that matter to them when we can.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen faculty take really innovative approaches to doing this, even before a course starts. I mean, they've had students, for example, answer a few online questions before the start of term.
So that would help us understand who they are, what they care about, maybe why they signed up for the course, their motivation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. The other thing we can do is actually share that map that we designed with them and help them understand how each stage of the journey helps us get closer to the destination.
Okay, so they would sort of zoom out and then zoom in. So big picture and then immediate surroundings, a bit like a GPS.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, I said 4 things, didn't I?
4 things.
Right, okay. So last, and likely most importantly, we can undertake assessment in ways that help progress on the path.
So how we would determine whatever mark they get?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
So we can actually use assessment as a means of enabling learning rather than just to determine how much a student's learned. So this is assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning.
Okay, so just to ask a question in front of about 300 people. Huh?
Right, so one of the most important things that we can do to help students progress is to give them feedback on how and where they can improve. So we need to plan how we're going to give students that feedback at each stage and design in opportunities for them to try things out and possibly even fail, but without dire consequences.
So if they have to scale the rock face, they at least do it with a safety harness.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So low or no stakes assessment so that students can try things out, get feedback, and then improve.
So without the constant fear of failure and being crushed on the rocks below.
Yes, that's it. So of course this has to be manageable with a larger number of students. So we can use group work to have students learn from and with each other. We can also have students undertake activities and basically get feedback before they get a mark. So doing things like an online quiz or a practice clinical simulation or handing in a draft paper. Now, all of these things, or not all of them, but some of them, do require an investment of time. But they have been shown to lessen anxiety and improve student learning.
And presumably they could actually decrease the amount of time instructors have to deal with emails or extension requests or even students contesting grades.
Yeah, quite true, quite true. Now, to make this possible, we need to invest in systems as well as implement policies that are going to enable this type of assessment. We need to support program teams as well as instructors who want to make these kinds of changes. And we need to all fundamentally rethink the key purposes of assessment.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, we design a joined-up curriculum, and actually we make clear and we involve students in our instruction, and then we share a picture of the journey that students are on, particularly highlighting the relevance to them, and then we assess and give feedback in ways that allows for both failure and improvement.
Those are the four.
So if we do what you're suggesting and we invest in that change, you think that actually we'd have fewer students actually lost, disconnected, isolated, fewer students struggling with these questions?
Exactly.
And actually more students with positive mental health.
I mean, that's the ultimate goal, of course. I mean, there are many people doing the things that I've talked about in higher education already. We all need to work together to make it the norm.
But we know, working in institutions, that change can be slow and contentious. And that's before we even start talking about having the resources for change.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But I do know that everyone in the university environment, and in fact everyone in this room, would agree that nothing's more important than the mental health and well-being of everyone on our campuses. It's foundational to both academic success and to wellness. So these two things can either be mutually exclusive or mutually supportive.
And we need to make sure it's the latter.
Making this change will help us create environments where students know and do belong, care, and believe they can succeed.
And actually failing to make this change isn't an option. The cost would be far too high, probably already is. Every student needs to believe they can succeed, and we need to change so that they can. Thank you.